Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast, powered by ISOFIT, Firefly Recovery, and Engage Movement. ISOFIT is my go-to for all things isometric strength training. For more on ISOFIT, be sure to check out fit.com. Firefly Recovery is the official recovery provider of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast. For more on Firefly, be sure to check out recoveryfirefly.com. This episode is also powered by Dr. Ray Gorman, the founder of Engage Movement. Learn how to boost your income without relying on sessions and get a free training on the blended practice model by following Ray Gorman DPT on Instagram. Enjoy. Angelo, welcome to the podcast, man. Super excited to chat with you today. And obviously it was great connecting with you last year at NSCA Baltimore that way. For people who aren't familiar with you and all the great work you're doing, whether that be on the college sector side of S&C, to your role within the NSCA, to some of the books that you've authored and written that way, would you mind filling them in a bit about who you are and all the great stuff you've got going on?
Sure, man. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show, Bob. Listen to almost every episode. Big fan. Super excited to talk today about this and talk to your listeners. But I guess a couple things. My main thing, my day job, I'm the strength and conditioning coach at Seton Hall University. I just finished my 20-year anniversary about less than a week ago. So I'm 20 years in, which if you're involved in the college athletics world at all, that's a long time in a regular job. It's forever in a college job. So I've been, there's good and bad to be at the same place for 2 decades. We get into that if you want, but I've been really lucky and it's worked out really well for me. I guess the way we met was down at the NSCA National Conference in Baltimore last year, down around your way. I wasn't presenting. I was just there as a guest. I wanted to check it out and learn from everybody down there. And then my main role at the NSCA is I'm New Jersey State Director. So if you're listening, that kind of means my main duty is to put together our state conference every year. We did that in May of 2025. We're starting to put together May of 2026 right now as we speak. And then that's kind of about it NSCA-wise. And then book-wise, in the last couple of years, I've had 2 come out. One was Finish Strong, resistance training for endurance athletes. And the most recent one is the next 4 years, compete, win, and thrive in college sports. The titles are pretty self-explanatory, getting into the content as much as you would like. But yeah, man, that's kind of it. I'm a strength and conditioning coach, get to be active in the NSCA, and I've written a couple books over the last couple of years. So that kind of covers it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. And it sounds like, as you mentioned, having 20 years of experience in the college sector of S&C that way, that is certainly a bit of a flex. And I mean, the space is changing and evolving rapidly that way. And I'm sure that might have even inspired kind of your more recent book there, The Next 4 Years that way. Is I feel like athletes themselves are changing and evolving, and the athletes that I work with now from the clinical side of things are different than some of the athletes that I worked with when I initially got into the practice that way. And I can't necessarily quantify it into something objective like a number. I just feel like from the personalities and the conversations that we have, that there's a difference between this kind of like next generation of athletes that we're getting and the athletes that, I was around when I played sports, or the athletes that I was first treating when I was out of school that way. And I'm not 100% sure what that one thing is, or if it is just one thing, but I feel like there's just been this kind of evolution within the sports space that way. Have you seen something similar from your side in the college world that way, where there's some kind of evolution or change happening amongst the athletes that we work with that way? And it's just kind of hard to put into words what it is.
Yeah, I think there's 2 things you want to look at, in my opinion, right? One is the business and economic side of college athletics has changed more in the last 5 years than it had in the previous 70 years, right? College athletics were pretty much one thing from the early 1950s till 2020, and then we shut down for COVID, and we came back, and it's never been the same since 2020. The biggest thing we're looking at now at a basketball school like Seton Hall, or a football school like anyone you might think of, is the NIL and the paying the players is a new idea, right? So now players are much more employees than they've ever been before. And I think it's in some ways that's a good thing, but for people like us on the physical side, you create some barriers that we'll talk about in a second. Then the other thing is, I think younger kids are playing in the transfer portal. The transfer portal, the idea you could be at 4 colleges in 4 years and work with 4 different athletic trainers, 4 different strength and conditioning staffs, 4 different coaching staffs is a completely new idea, right? So I think when me and you were playing sports, I'm not sure exactly how old you are, but if I look back to the late 90s, early 2000s, went to high school for 4 years, the same school most of the time. went to college for 4 years, the same school most of the time. And then if you were lucky enough to play professionally, you were on the same team for a long time, right? Guys had long contracts in the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball. And that's just completely changed in this generation, right? Nobody, we deal with kids all the time. They've been to 3 or 4 high schools, they've been to 3 or 4 colleges, and now the way free agency works in most of the major sports, you're able to change teams all the time, right? So think about it. If in the 90s, I grew up a big Michael Jordan fan, right? Such a big fan. If I was less a fan, I have a better house right now because I blew so much money on sneakers over the years, right? But Jordan was a Chicago Bull. That was it. My entire life. And then at the very end, he played for the Wizards, right? But if you're 20 now and you grow up a big Kevin Durant fan or a big LeBron James fan, they've been on 5 teams each, right? So the idea of kind of team loyalty is kind of a thing of the past. And I understand in the era where you can make more money and your grandkids to spend by making the right decisions and going to team, that's probably a good thing, right? But the idea of just everyone's kind of a hired gun, a mercenary, and if I don't like the way this PT addresses me, I don't like the way this strength coach trains me, I can immediately go to somebody else down the street or online or with somebody across the country. That's a new thing, right? It's a new idea that this generation has actually that we just didn't. I think that's a game changer. And the other thing I'm seeing at college level, training-wise, from a physical perspective, lower training ages, right? Because we went through an era in the 90s, 2000s, there were off seasons. Like you played football from August until November, and then you went to the weight room for the winter, and then maybe you did track, then you went back to the weight room in the summer. And we deal with baseball guys that they play baseball 12 months a year for their entire high school career. Our swimmers, they swim 12 months a year, right? So we're doing very high skill level, very good at skill acquisition, very bad bodies a lot of the time, right? So I think as we're dealing with kids that they have the body of like a 13-year-old, but they're actually 18 or 19, and he can throw a baseball 90 plus miles an hour, but can't do a squat, can't do a lunge, can't do a push-up. And that's kind of what I've seen at my level. Is that pretty close to what you've seen, Dan?
Interesting to open up that kind of conversation a bit. And this is one we've had a number of recordings that I haven't released yet on the podcast lately about is, there's this concept on one hand about kind of like meeting basic fundamentals from a movement strategy standpoint that we feel is kind of essential to sport, right? Like, hey, before you try and throw a baseball 95 miles an hour, maybe having the ability to do a full range of motion lateral lunge might be a good thing, right? To show, hey, we have some hip mobility, we know how to move in different planes and so on that way, right? However, to your point, a lot of kids now aren't able to do some of those basic movement requirements, yet they're able to engage at such high levels of their sport. So it becomes this mismatch, if you will, where outside of the sport, a lot of these athletes aren't able to do much, but within their sport, they're able to do anything they want beyond their wildest dreams. And it's essentially this concept of we've gotten them so skilled at these very few things, but they've missed the milestones to get there somehow. They were literally able to go from level 1 to level 100 and skip levels along the way. So on one hand, maybe we've figured out a cheat code and cracked the system in how to develop some of these athletes into elite performers at their sport. But on the other hand, I got to look at myself and ask myself, is that the right thing, the correct thing? Because, okay, maybe they're highly skilled, but what are the injury rates? What are the outcomes of that? Mentally, are they okay? Or are they facing things like burnout, performance anxiety? You throw out baseball. So I feel like I throw out the term the yips a lot in baseball, where it's like, hey, they should be performing at this high level, but for some reason mentally they're kind of blocked up and kind of in their own head, if you will. It's conversations like that I think are not had enough about kind of like the pros and cons of kind of where we're at as a kind of sport space in general that way.
And what I say now, I like to use is right. A lot of athletes, not all, but a lot of young athletes are like a house with a really nice first floor, right? Hardwood floors, marble countertops, just killing the first floor on a very shaky foundation, right? And that foundation to me is basic movement patterns, good sound body structures, balance, proprioception, stuff like that, right? And then your skill developing is your first floor of the house. So I just say there are people that can get away. You can go buy a house with a bad foundation. You want to make it a year or two and not have any problems. You really might do that, right? But there might be a hurricane, there might be an earthquake, there might, something might break down, and eventually that young man or woman is in the training room, on the operating table, dealing with either a nagging injury or a traumatic injury, and then we're in charge of trying to do their comeback, right, the recovery, which I like that part of my job. But I think if we just addressed it earlier in some kids and really got good at those foundational movements, and then crushed it with the skill development and the reps you need to get really good at sports skill, they would probably be better and have longer careers than if they didn't build that foundation, right? And I think, like you said, we might have found a cheat code. This might be, more work than it's worth. But I think for a lot of people who want to stay uninjured and have an active lifestyle, that for your entire life, not just your competitive life, that foundation is super important.
Absolutely. Yeah, you really do need to develop some level of foundation. I mean, at the end of the day, I compare it almost to the schooling system. Whether you love it, hate it, have whatever opinions about it you want, in the schooling system, there's grades. And in order to progress from one grade to the next, there's certain requirements and, if nothing else, minimums that you have to meet in order to earn the right to kind of progress to the next grade. And we've almost escaped that system in the sports world, where we don't necessarily have any kind of timeline on these progressions. You can be playing with some of the best soccer players in the world at age 15 and 16 if you're skilled enough. You can be playing baseball with kids 3 years older than you if you're skilled enough, right? Like, we've almost escaped this concept of developmental milestones as it relates to sports performance, and instead just kind of gone at it in this kind of like Modge Podge kind of way where we just slap pieces together. And if we're told the kid's doing well, then yeah, we're going to bump them to the next level because, hey, people are saying they're doing good. We might as well challenge them a bit. And it's just so fascinating to me because on one hand, again, as we've discussed, it creates this phenomenal performance that we're seeing in some of these kids at such a young age, but we're neglecting some of the physiological milestones and development that needs to occur, right? Like, I've referenced the prefrontal cortex on several podcasts lately. That's not fully developed in kids until they're in their mid to late 20s. And yet we're treating 18 to 19-year-olds like they're fully developed and mature and ready to go on with, anything and everything, but they're not fully developed yet. And we forget that in part of this conversation is they're still developing, they're still learning, and they're still leveling up to that next level of performance that way, at least from a psychological and physiological standpoint, in my opinion.
And just two things real quick, because I really love this conversation. One is this. We have seen for decades that if you take a 21, 22, possibly 23-year-old man out of college, draft him into one of the 4 major sports, give him a large sum of money, doesn't work out well a lot of the time, right? We've seen that, right? A lot of times. Now we're giving similar sums of money to 17 and 18-year-old kids that are coming to high school to play college. Now, in a decade, are we going to be shocked if this doesn't work out well? When everything you just said about prefrontal cortex development is true, are we going to be shocked that a lot of kids that were worth $1 million at 17 have no money left by 27? That's a real thing we're going to have to deal with, and this reckoning we're going to come to with. We saw a system didn't work with people in their early 20s. We're going to do the exact thing with people in their late teens and act shocked when it didn't work, right? The other thing, I want to reference one of your other episodes. I really like the one you did with Eric. I forgot his last name. Eric Lichter. And he was talking about he's a speed guru. He's great at developing speed in people. And he told me how he's 50. He's been around for a long time. I'm close to that age, not quite 50 yet. But he was talking about how he's using the tech now to make what he did 20 years ago better, right? Not the coach is going to be around because you're using the new technology. It's a weird thing. I feel like with sports, up until this generation of coaches, you just eyeball the kid. He's 13, but I think he could hit senior year pitching. Let's see how he does on varsity. She's a pretty good swimmer now. Let's put her in a pool with the older girl, see how she does, right? Do you think in the era we live in now, where reliance on technology, this might get better, that we're going to be able to empirically prove young men and women are not ready to play up a few levels, or they need to develop X before they could do Y? And this generation of coaches and sport development and PT and all the stuff we talk about in this show do better because they're able to show data of this person has this strength deficit, this person has this range of motion lack, and then we start, as a profession, we attack that and get the numbers better before they move on to play at a higher level. Is that possible? Because I know most people my age hate all the technology. I like it, but I think this is a thing that if we do it right, it could make everything better. Is that a possibility?
It's a double-edged sword, and I think the last point you hit on, if we do it right, is the most important to this conversation, right? Because a lot of times people will cite numbers, but they don't cite how they got those numbers, right? So they might post that some kid had a 44-inch vertical jump, but I don't just want to take that number at face value. I still want that coach's eye element to that, right? Like, okay, they jumped 44 inches in the air. That's wicked impressive. How did they do it? What did it look like? And so on that way. And same thing with some of these other metrics that way. Like if we look at, take force plates, for example, it's like I'm getting 7 pages of data from a single counter movement jump. That's insane. What numbers and what metrics do I pull from those 7 pages? Which ones are more important than the others, right? And on top of that, can I draw conclusions from force plates from one company to the next to the next? Or are they, not necessarily synonymous, right? Like there's one force plate company that's kind of newer to the space that way. And their sampling rate, I believe, is like 400 or 500 hertz, whereas others that are pretty common are about 1,000 hertz. And then there's some that are coming out still above ground force plates that are 2,000 hertz. They're sampling the data at very different frequencies. Can I draw conclusions between the metrics from the 500 hertz rate to the 2,000 hertz rate? There's more questions than answers that I have at this point. And on top of that, those numbers, as great as they might be, can change drastically in a short amount of time. There was some work done by Ola Eriksrud from 1080 and isokinetics in particular, which was just fascinating to me. He was looking at this, I believe it was in an athlete following a abdominal or core injury, and they did some isokinetic testing. And with the training protocol that they developed, which was all isokinetic, I believe, they saw 400% improvement in 6 weeks. So drastic improvement in a short amount of time. But I look at that and I say, well, was that 400% improvement due to physical structural changes? Or was that just neurophysiological changes and kind of rewiring how the body adapted to those specific task at hand, the specific test that was being administered through more specific training for the test, if that makes sense, right? Like we didn't train them with isometrics and isotonics to prep for isokinetics. We trained them with isokinetics to test isokinetics. So while I think this data world and the emergence of numbers is very fascinating in a lot of ways, and it's one that I'm very much excited and eager to learn more about, I don't think we're at the point yet to really be drawing dramatic and drastic conclusions from the numbers that we get until we have the ability to process millions and millions of more data points and actually look at them from an analytical standpoint. I just don't think we're at that level yet, but I think that we can get there long term. I think that coach's eye element is always going to be an important part of the conversation. And it's one that I just don't think you can replace. I mean, it kind of speaks to the human element and the character element of this whole thing, right? Like in your book, the next 4 years that way, you cover a lot of things beyond just the physical and the objective. It's like, how does an athlete select a school? How does an athlete get recruited? How do they prepare to literally arrive on campus first time ever away from mom and dad, most likely, to succeed at this next level? And it's like, I'll take the kid that has that character element and is built out ready to succeed over the kid that's, 5% better on a force plate jump any day of the week if I'm the coach.
Yeah, I think almost everyone would agree with that, right? And I think that the one thing, the numbers we haven't figured out yet, it's going to sound like a cliche, but we don't have a metric that measures heart, right? We have a metric that measures intensity. We have a metric that measures competitiveness yet. And I think, I don't know if you will or not at any point in the future, but I think that's the thing, you can't really put a number on that, right? The idea with the book was, though, to cultivate those things, right? So if you're going from senior year in high school to freshman year in college, there are some things you can do that you have to do. So just say, for example, you're a soccer player and the coach wants everyone to run a 6-minute mile. You can prepare for that 6-minute mile. If you get the information early, get a training program, and get ready to beat that test, you can absolutely do that, right? But then there's a bunch of stuff that gets in it's very black and white. You can make the time or you can't. I think there's a lot of gray area in between of navigating your first time away from home, navigating relationships with coaches and support staff, navigating a major and academic commitments with sport commitments, with being away from home for the first time in your life. And I just feel like, at Seton Hall, I've done a really good job with our freshmen over the years, and at this point, decades, helping them make that adaptation. And I just thought more and more people needed access to that because, we get a weird thing going on where kids, I worked at everything from McDonald's All-American basketball players to walk-on swimmers, and just they're unprepared across the board. Physically, mentally, sometimes emotionally, a lot of times nutritionally, they just don't know how to eat when they're away from mom and dad. And I just think getting the information out there to more people, more families early is only going to make the transition better for everyone involved.
It almost sounds like we have to find a way to teach the parents how to be a high performance director for their children, starting at a very young age, so that some of those habits are instilled younger. So when they do get to that next level, whether that's college or beyond, it's just second nature to the kid by that point. It's like, oh, I've always handled my nutrition. I've always handled X, Y, and Z because that's how they were brought up. And I think on top of that too, having that kind of like high performance director mindset from such a young age helps you kind of keep the focus on that long-term big picture, because unfortunately, in relation to athlete development, there's a lot of individuals out there who will gladly trade a kid's future success for a local tournament win over the weekend that way. And it's unfortunate, but someone needs to be willing to step in and be the person that says, hey, look, this is not what's best for them in the long run. We need to kind of pump the brakes here a bit.
Yeah, and that was part of the idea behind the book. I'm super active in my town's Little League. My daughter just turned 10. She's a pretty good softball player. We had a good run this year in softball in my part of New Jersey. But what I learned is this. The overwhelming majority of parents I deal with want the best for their kids. They're doing research. They think they're doing the best thing. But it is, if you don't have a background in some kind of sports medicine, and you don't play sports at a high level, there is so much information out there, so many conflicting opinions, a lot of things that, me and you might swear by, two other guys on the podcast might tell you you're dead wrong. And then the kids we train will do well, the kids they train will do well. I think just having first of all, if you're an aspiring athlete, you're middle school or high school, and your parents are invested in your training and driving your practice and seeking help and making nutrition recommendations, even if I don't agree with them, I tip my hat to those parents. They're trying, they're engaged, they're doing the best they can, right? And then once we get past that, I want to give people the stuff that I know works at the next level, because I've been lucky enough to be at that next level for so long, right? And the joke I always make is, think about the first time you bought a car. First time you buy a car, it is a very intimidating experience. You don't know what kind of tires you need, what kind of warranties, what you want the payments to be like. Second time you buy a car, much easier experience. Fifth car you buy, it's easy, right? Everything you do in life, the more times you do it, the easier it gets. Well, the problem with that analogy is there's nobody goes to college 5 times. So everyone's a first-time consumer. And a lot of times with student athletes, the parents either didn't go to college, which is fine, or they weren't student athletes when they were in college. Because statistically, it's such a small, minute number of people that get to do this. The idea of you having someone in your immediate circle that can give you really good guidance is pretty slim, right? So part of the idea behind the book was knowing that when we're on that recruiting journey, what questions to ask, what to look into, how to go down a rabbit hole online to find out what really goes on in a program. If you don't do those things, you're going to go away and be surprised. And sometimes you might be surprised in a positive way, but a lot of times it might be negative. And that's why the transfer portal is as active as it's been the last couple of years.
Absolutely. No, it makes me think back to a conversation I had with Ron Sayers at the start of the year, where we were discussing some of those different concepts that you outlined, right? Like, how do you go about the recruiting process successfully? And, some athletes, they look forward to, possibly transferring schools and kind of getting different experiences, right? It's kind of like your time in life to kind of test the waters of a lot of different areas, right? You can move around, see what areas you like and you don't like, and so on that way, which can be great and very beneficial. But by the same token, there's something to be said about really developing deep relations, connections, and community in a college team environment that way. And I think a lot of times people think about, the rewards from college athletics being very related to them and the work that they put into it for their team and so on that way, when in reality, I think the human element holds tried and true at the end of the day, in the sense that it's not just about the sport, it's about the captains that you work with within the sport that help develop you as a person and as a team, the coaches that pour into you, whether that be the strength coaches, the team coaches, and beyond that way. It's kind of that people element that plays into it as well. And I think that the more you kind of go about making sure that there's a fit from a cultural standpoint and beyond before you commit to a program, the better off you're going to be long term. And I think a lot of the times, the reason we don't see these things working out is because there's a difference from a cultural standpoint between what that team is trying to implement or striving for and what that athlete might be seeking out that way. And the more you kind of mesh those two together, the better off you're going to be long term. But if you don't understand what that culture is from the start, you're just asking for trouble, right? You're filling in gaps with assumptions, and then you're surprised and upset when it doesn't work out. So to your point, I think the more clear you can make those things from the start, and this goes to anything, not just what you do from a collegiate athlete standpoint, but even in life. You reference buying a car or even buying a house or even something as simple like, hey, I've got some tendinopathy in my knee and I need to choose a physical therapist, right? Like, make sure you do your due diligence the first time around and almost interview these people to make sure that they've kind of like earned the right to work with you, in the sense that it's a mesh between their character and personality and your own character and personality. Quick break, because if you're a rehab professional sick of burnout, this could be your answer. Engage Movement's blended practice model is a proven system built by Dr. Ray Gorman, a PT who walked away from the 55-hour-a-week grind and built a blended practice model that doubled his income while working less than 25 hours a week, and he didn't have to rely on the traditional way of selling sessions to do so. It's all about blending remote and in-person services, stacking monthly recurring revenue, and building a business that finally supports your life, not the other way around. This model isn't just theory. Real providers, including myself, are creating lives of freedom and flexibility without being tied to their schedule. And as a listener, you get free access to the complete training. DM my name, Dan, to @RayGormanDPT on Instagram and receive your free breakdown on the model.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And a couple of things I think that really cloud people's judgment that I think needs to be cleared up. Number one, higher education is incredibly expensive in the United States. I work at a college that's $75,000 a year. That's a $300,000 investment by the time you get a 4-year degree, right? So what happens is parents and kids, rightfully so, see a way to get out of debt and not put themselves in debt, and will sign a scholarship at the drop of a dime, right? And I understand that. It's life-changing money for anybody with $100,000, right? But to some extent, you got to think about, do they have a major I want to base my life on? Or if I get there, am I going to hate every minute of it? If you can go to school debt-free in the current economic environment, you got to do it. There's no way you cannot do it. Or can you make some decisions to make that a little bit better and push them just to succeed in a career for the rest of your life, right? And the other side of the thing, I think on the recruiting process, I always say, I don't work with any coaches that are liars. None. I work with a lot of coaches that are good salesmen, good saleswomen, right? So when they bring you into the weight room and they show you, oh, we got the laser S plates with the pirate head, and we got the pirate head and the platforms, and we got 8 rack, platform combos. Kids their heads are spinning. And I'm like, yeah, well, we didn't tell them is you're going to be in this room 4 days a week, 6 a.m., it's super high intensity, might not have slept too much last night because you had schoolwork or something social going on. So I think we need a little bit more transparency in both, right? So obviously, if you're looking to recruit to play at a Division I school, our recruiting pitch to you a lot of time is, you're going to Hall of Fame. We need you. You're going to bring our program to the next level. In reality, we're saying, we think you have a lot of the tools that will make you successful here. So we're going to give you a shot with us. And if you do everything right, eat right, sleep right, hydrate right, train hard, develop as a player, you might be a great player at some point, right? But you can't say that up front because they're going to go to school telling them they're great already. So the sales pitch comes in, and believe it, man, if people know what they're talking about tell you you're great, you probably have a really good chance to be great if you do everything right and work hard and do the right things. But real life, it's a job. It can be a very high-paying job in a current environment, but it's a job, and it takes a work ethic and a commitment to get through it and not get injured, not transferred, and make it through and be productive in any conference you play in. So just realize, man, you're signing the dotted line, and we're going to give you some stuff. You got to give us some stuff, time, effort, energy, and at the end, hopefully everybody gets what they want out of the process.
On the training side of things, right? Let's bring that back into the picture for a second. A lot of athletes do have to do those early mornings or late night training sessions. I remember when I was in college, I was just going to the gym to get my own kind of personal workout in the mornings, like every morning, like 5:30, 6 a.m., the lacrosse team was in there getting their team lift in. And I didn't like that because there wasn't any room to work, like move around and so on that way. So I started going later in the day. But, even 6, 7 o'clock at night, sometimes there's teams in the weight room getting their lifts in. It doesn't matter if it's early morning or late night. It's predefined times that you don't necessarily have control over. And I think a lot of times the training that athletes expect themselves to be doing at this sort of next level of sport, if you will, is drastically different than what it actually is. Their perception is different than what it actually is. And a lot of them kind of seek out some of these like Instagram guru private trainer specialists that go in and give them all these like, quote unquote sports specific workout drills that personally drive me crazy, right? Like, they've got freaking basketballs that attach to a cable column that they're marketing as being more sports specific, because apparently holding a bar for a lat pull down is not as good of a carryover to basketball as holding a freaking basketball to do lat pull downs. I don't know who comes up with this stuff, but I think that we almost need to like educate the next generation of athletes as to what good training actually looks like and what it doesn't look like. Because to the point we made before, if you can't even do a freaking body weight lunge with decent form, how are we going to go about preparing you to play extremely high level sport or being, hyper sport specific in our training approach when we've missed so many foundational milestones in the first place just to get to this point?
Yeah, man, we live in a country where I'm a big fan of America. I'm patriotic, all of that. But I think one thing we need to do better is educating people on how the human body works, right? One of the reasons why we have a multi-billion-dollar fitness industry where, like you said, basically fads and gimmicks can become incredibly successful is people don't understand the way the body works, right? So I think we need to do a better job from a younger age of teaching people basic nutrition, basic activities throughout the lifespan, basic biomechanics and energy metabolism. And then we wouldn't see, the basketball attachment to the lat pull down machine sell 10,000 units a month. Like, it would just go away. We wouldn't have the shake weight if people understood how the body works, right? We wouldn't have the infomercial culture we had in 92,000. So I think that's one thing we definitely got to get better at as a culture. I think this show and guys like me and you are doing our part to make the problem better, right? I think we are. The other thing I think, if you're a student athlete and you sign a scholarship, the best thing you could do is contact the strength and conditioning coach as soon as possible. And if you're injured in any capacity, contact the sports medicine staff as soon as possible and find out what's going to be expected of you when you get there, right? So, for example, you get the lacrosse example, you try to go to the gym, weight rooms jammed up with the lacrosse kids. Well, if you're going to play lacrosse at that college and you got to lift weights every day at 6 a.m. and you think you're not a morning person, well, you got to figure it out that summer and become a morning person, right? Because they're not changing that workout schedule because you don't get going until 9 a.m. They usually lift at 6 a.m. Find out what conditioning tests are going to be asked of you. Find out what the weight room looks like and go start getting good at it that spring and summer before you get there, right? Same thing on the injury side. If you're dealing with some injuries, contact the sports medicine staff. If they have a PT in-house they contract out to, contact him or her and get that ball rolling as soon as you can, right? Because, it's a cliche. Right now, you got a little problem. The longer you let it go, then now you got a big problem, right? So if you're committed to go to a place, I think what I always tell people is when you sign the NLI or the contract, whatever we're calling it these days, put it up on YouTube, put it up on Instagram, get the likes, be a local celebrity for a day, enjoy that. It's awesome. The next day, you got to clock in. All the people that are going to be there, send some emails, and figure out what that first day is going to look like and where you can get ready for it. If you just do that, you will be miles ahead of most incoming freshmen.
Absolutely. And to your point, it's beginning with the end in mind, right? It's knowing what those end goals are and what you're going to be working towards, and then engineering a plan to get there once you know what that end looks like. And a lot of times, I don't think athletes understand what that end goal looks like. They might say, oh, well, I want to be the best athlete. Okay, what does that take? Let's dive deeper into that. Does the best athlete bench 600 pounds and, hit, upper body 5 days a week? Or is the best athlete someone who's going to maybe like crush it on the field, do X, Y, and Z, maybe train in more of a full body style? And as you mentioned, the time component plays into it and so on that way as well. It's understanding what you're going to be asked to do and then developing your plan from there. And to your point, I think if more athletes were willing to just ask the questions and reach out to their support personnel, they're called support personnel to support you in your development that way. It's like, I'm sure if you reach out to a strength coach or you reach out to a training staff and you say something like, hey, feel like my hip's been really tight lately, not sure what's going on. Do you have any recommendations, any kind of like things I can do? Most people in the space are more than willing to help you that way, but ultimately it falls on the athlete to kind of take the initiative to start that conversation, right? We can't have that for them. We can't tell what's going on within the athlete's body and mindset day to day that way. We're looking to them to kind of step up and give us some kind of clue and guidance that, hey, you know, the metaphorical check engine light is going on. Can you help me figure out what it means and what I need to do about it from here?
And when I say this, I've been saying this for about 7-8 years now, and I really stand by it. If you are an incoming student athlete at any college in the country, regardless of your scholarship, your NIL deal, whatever you're getting out of this agreement, if you reach out to that strength and conditioning coach and he or she does not get back to you in a reasonable period of time, you should decommit and go to another college. I look at it like this. You're about to give me 4 years of your life. I got to give you a call or an email. If you're trying to get ahead and find out what you could do to be ready when you show up, it is my responsibility, not as a strength coach, just as a human being, to get back to you and give you the tools you need to succeed, right? And I think most of us do a good job of getting back to people in a situation. But I think you gotta answer every email, take every call, and then if you don't show up ready when I told you what to do, now that's your problem. But if I told you what you needed to do and you chose not to do it, that's if I didn't tell you what you needed to do and you didn't do it, that's my problem, right? So I think you got to give people the tools they need to succeed, and then as in our job is be there for them to help them and support them get from point A to point B, whatever that is.
Absolutely. And one of the other things you brought up that comes up a lot when I'm talking with athletes is you brought up the conditioning element as well. And a lot of athletes tend to be very concerned or stressed about some of these different conditioning assessments that they have to pass, whether that be a timed mile or some of these like Man U fitness tests and some of these other things that way. Or I think some groups still even do like almost like a beep test or pacer test that way. And for some reason, athletes get very stressed out about the conditioning element that way and making sure that they're, you know, in their terms, in shape enough to play at the next level that way. And this is an area that I see a lot of just differing opinions that way, in the sense that some are willing to kind of run these athletes into the ground and basically have them be like practically marathon runners to prep for a field-based sport that way. Whereas others are kind of going at it a more different route, and they may be doing 1 day a week of kind of long duration running, and maybe some other times they're doing more like repeat sprint bouts and some intervals, and maybe even working in some like breathing and breath work and training systems that play into endurance, but are not necessarily just fueling more mileage that way. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this kind of approach to conditioning tests or conditioning assessments when maybe you've never done one before, you're not sure how to train for it, but it's kind of the expectation at the next level that way.
Okay, couple that, and it's a great topic. So a couple things. We see a lot of times, a lot of your anaerobic athletes, right? Your baseball, your softball, those kind of kids really can't run any kind of distance, right? If the coach says we're running a mile, they get all disgruntled because that's not their sport. And I obviously, running multiple miles does not do anything for an anaerobic sport athlete, right? We could both, any layperson could agree with that, right? But I also agree with that specialization gone too far with young people, where if you get winded on your way from the locker room to the dugout, you don't have a baseball problem, you have a life problem, right? You should be a better runner where you don't get shin splints running, half a mile or whatever it is, right? That's part of the bigger problem. The other thing I think is if you're locked into place somewhere and head coach says you have to do the beep test to level 3.4 or whatever it is, it really doesn't matter what you think about it. It's like your boss telling you got to be at work at 8 a.m. or your first appointment's not until 9. I got to be there at 8 if that's what the boss says, right? That's kind of what you agree to, even though much we might disagree as professionals. But the one thing that's a positive on this is if I was putting a book together, I've been at Seton Hall for so long, I only knew what our teams did. So I put up in the NSCA Facebook groups that I was active in, what conditioning test are you doing where you are? I tell you, thousands of people in NSCA Facebook groups, and the overwhelming majority of what I got back were people saying they were not doing any more conditioning tests, right? So I think so in the book, I have the prep for some of the ones that I saw, but I would say 80% of the respondents we're not doing it where we are right now. So that's a good thing, right? We're realizing that if we want to be good at a sport, we don't need to run a marathon. We're not running a marathon in any sports. We don't need to do that. So I think that's a good thing. So that's kind of what I'm seeing out there, a profession a little bit better, a little bit smarter, and maybe impacting. And the other thing we're seeing too is the old school, old sport coaches that were into all the miles of running. They're kind of done, right? They've retired or moved on or not really in it. And if you look at now, most of the sport coaches that played sports in the last 20 years, they saw how foolish some of those tests were. And now they're smart enough to not doing that. They're coaching. So I think that's one of the things we've seen in a positive light in the last 20 years. But I will say, if you're committed to a program and they need you to do test X and you have all summer to prepare for it and you show up unprepared, that's still on you as a player, right? If you knew what you had to do, chose not to do it, then you're going to put a bullseye on your back and not be ready. So, what I say in the book is every Friday, practice your conditioning test, whatever it is, have a time, grade out your results and be ready to go when you get there. And then on your other Monday or other conditioning days, do your maybe more sports specific stuff, but be ready for that test if you have to take it.
Absolutely. No, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? I think about it in relation to the exams that one might take in school, right? You study and prep for those exams. So when they come around, you're ready to pass them. And maybe, you try and cram it all in the night before and it tends to not go too well versus maybe you start a long time in advance and give yourself some time to kind of prep for it that way, and it tends to go better. The same is true with these conditioning assessments, right? If you're going to do something along the lines of conditioning, it's like, hey, maybe in prep for this test, I'm going to start early so I give myself enough time to get to the level that I need to be at. And maybe I'm even going to take like a practice test along the way, right? Like if I know what the conditioning test is going to be, let's say it's a timed mile, hey, could I run myself through a practice timed mile and see how I do? And then maybe just ask a few more questions to yourself and dig a little bit deeper from there. Hey, I didn't perform at the level that I wanted to in this practice test. What could I be doing differently? Is it something from a training standpoint, or even dig a little bit deeper? Hey, did I fuel properly for this? Because I think a lot of times nutrition is often forgotten about. And, if you woke up that day and just decided, what, I'm going to go run a mile and raw dog it with nothing in the tank, then maybe it's not going to go as well as, maybe hypothetically eat like a banana and something else like an hour before you do it and you feel a little bit better. You feel like you got a little bit more in the tank that way. But until you start that process of almost like self-experimenting with some of these things as an athlete, you don't know. And I think the sooner you get into that self-experimentation side of things and kind of decoding what makes your own engine run a little bit more effectively, a little bit more efficiently, and what allows you to get a little bit more out of each tank or perform at a little bit of a higher level, the better off you're going to be, not just for that first conditioning test, but ultimately for the rest of your collegiate career as an athlete, because you're actually getting in tune with some of these performance variables, right? I think in one sense, people look at something like a conditioning test and assume it's just to make sure that they can, pass a test and they're in shape for the season. But on the other hand, there's a lot of character building elements, like I just outlined, kind of interweaving into the prep and the actual assessment itself there that I think are often forgotten about.
Agreed, right? The other thing I would say too, keep in mind if you're dealing with some anxiety or some trepidation to take a conditioning test as a college athlete, the people that put that together want everyone to pass, right? And the idea is that if whatever time they pick, whatever standard holding team to, they put that together because the players they recruited should be able to do that. So you should feel pretty confident you can do it, right? I think that's a lot of times people go in these tests just crippled with fear and anxiety. And then in some cases, they might need to see a professional or something like that. But in reality, if we're asking you to do something, realize that we think everyone can do it, right? I always say the professional side of things, that's like if you get picked to speak at a big conference, like the NSC National Conference coming up this week, if you got picked to do that, it means the people that put it together and watched all the submissions thought you could handle it. There's no reason to have stage fright. They put you on the stage. They gave you the good mic. They gave you the good AV setup. They got 300 people watching you. Now's the time to perform because you did all the things to make yourself successful on the way up to it, right? You did it at maybe you teach a class, you did it in front of a couple of kids in the lecture hall, then you did it at state conference, then you did it at the regional, now you're on the big stage. I think that's a way to look at it too, that if you take the steps, you got to, if you got to run a 6-minute mile, started at 9, well, then you got to 8-minute mile, 7-minute mile, 6-minute mile. Check the things you did off your checklist, and eventually you should feel pretty good about performing the task on the day you're supposed to do it if you do it right and plan properly.
Absolutely. No, I could not agree more. And I think that's another great element is a lot of times people look at these assessments thinking like, oh my gosh, there's no way I'm going to pass that, or that's impossible or something that way. It's more so just setting the standard and kind of like noting what the bar is at that next level that way. And I think there's sometimes a mismatch there. And I think the other thing too is some of the athletes that I've talked with that way almost feel this like sense of entitlement for themselves that way, saying like, well, they know how good I am. I shouldn't even have to take the test because like, well, I did this or I did that or whatever it is that way. And I think going back to that character element and the concept of, sports and the people that you interact with within the sports space can do more for your development than a lot of other things long-term later in life that way. I think some of that just comes from being willing to kind of look at yourself in the mirror and almost humble yourself a little bit and say like, look, yes, I might have done these great things, but that doesn't necessarily make me a better person than anyone else on this team. I might be a more skilled athlete, but the standards are still the standards. And I'm not going to be able to dodge the standards just because, well, I'm a better athlete. The coach needs me to be playing because, well, I'm the best on the team from a skill standpoint. It's like if you go into collegiate sports with that mindset and mentality, at least from my own experience, you've got another thing coming your way, unfortunately.
Yes, I totally agree with that. You got to be humble, got to know your role. If you're going to a program that's pretty good, you got to kind of have to wait it out to get a chance to play sometimes. That's hard for a lot of people, right? The one thing I will say about the conditioning test, if we could leave it at this, people my age want to scream at young people all the time. Back in my day, my generation, right? And here's where I think there's a disconnect. You're a high school athlete. Just say head coach X, to start recruiting you. First thing out of the coach's mouth is, "You're awesome. We like the way you play. You fit in what we're doing. We need you to come to campus." Then you come to campus. You get to campus. They roll the red carpet. They tell you, "Great, here's your locker. There's where to retire your jersey. We're going to pack the stadium for you every Saturday, whatever it might be." Right? Then once you're committed, you put it up on social media. We do photo shoots. We pump you out to our family. This is the best thing ever. We need this kid, best freshman class ever. And then you get to campus. And then we say, hold up, get in line with everybody else and run the drill. And if you don't run the drill properly, this can all end. And that's a weird juxtaposition, right? We told you how great you were for a year. And now all of a sudden we're like, oh, you're just like everybody else. And that's part of the recruiting process people don't really understand. And I understand why, if you're 17 or 18, that's a hard thing to deal with mentally, right? So I think in reality, it's kids and parents have to know what they're getting into when they're being recruited, and coaches maybe need to be a little more transparent, and we could probably all do better on both ends of that equation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the same is true if we just change the narrative slightly and flip it away from conditioning and flip it towards lifting, in particular, maybe for the endurance athlete, because I've worked with some endurance athletes in the past. They look at me and they're like, why am I lifting weights? This isn't what I have to do. I don't need this. I'm a runner. I just want to run. I don't want to be doing resistance band work. I don't want to be lifting dumbbells. I don't need that. Don't you understand my sport? And it's like, again, it might not be the first thing you think of when you think of cross country or track and field. You might not think of the weight room immediately, but it's like those are fundamentals and pieces to this performance puzzle that we have to check those boxes. You can attempt to avoid them, but it's ultimately not going to end well for you, speaking from experience and seeing other athletes that have tried to do that in the past, and it just doesn't go well. So it's like, how do we kind of reframe that mindset, not just in relation to conditioning and some of these other assessments that we might not want to do, even into some of the other training elements that, yeah, maybe we don't want to do them. Maybe we're a runner that doesn't want to, hit some legs in the gym once or twice a week that way. But let me tell you what, if you don't do those things, you're not going to be able to run at the level that you want for a long time without injury. There's different things that might pop up, whether that be overuse or whatever that way, that kind of enter the space if you don't meet some of those other requirements and don't kind of train to build a resilient and robust athlete. And when I say resiliency and robustness, I don't mean go make your kids go do 200 burpees. I mean, like, actually develop them a little bit physically so that they can withstand the forces that are applied to them from a training standpoint without running into overuse and other types of injuries.
And when I deal with endurance athletes that are resistant to weight training, and I use myself as an example, and it's this: I've done every race you could do, from a 5K to several marathons over the years. Every race I've ever done, they have professional photography at the starting line and the finish line, and then you get an email later in the week you could buy your pictures, right? Every single race I've ever done, me and everybody around me looks great the first couple feet after the starting line, right? Technique is great. Shoulder posture is great. Ground contact is great. Everybody's killing the first mile of a marathon, right? So they got those pictures. Then you get the end of the race, finish line pictures. Everybody, myself included, looks terrible technique-wise, right? Posture's bad, which means breathing is bad. Ground contact is not looking good. Upper arm body action not going great because you're weak and you're broke down over time, right? So my argument is, if we could just look as good finishing a race, technique-wise, running mechanics-wise, as we did starting a race, we would all be faster, right? If that's all you get out of it, you'll be faster. Then add on, injuries happen when our technique breaks down. Injuries happen when you have a weakness or immobility or our body. And then we can extend our running career. And what I always say too, the thing about running is you're not trying to do it for today. I'm a lifetime runner at this point in my life, right? So I think about, you might be able to get through 1 or 2 marathons with no resistance training, but eventually that's going to catch up to you, right? And if you want to, best thing about running to me is you can do it till you're 70, 80 years old if everything else goes right in your life, right? So I want to be out for the long haul, not just think I want to be at the end of my senior year cross country season. No, I want to be running 35 and a married professional and just getting out with my wife and kids and running. So, and that's a big thing to look at, the very long. It's one of the few sports you can really do throughout your entire lifespan if you take care of your body and do it right and be fairly competitive if you want to.
Absolutely. No, I could not agree more. And I think that's the other big element to this is it's not just being an athlete or being competitive during your college career. It's also carrying that over into life, right? I mean, you got to have that, post-college athletics pickleball career after all, right? Like whether it's pickleball or running or whatever you get into, it's like just because you might have to hang up your cleats or jersey from a collegiate standpoint doesn't mean that your life of sports success is over. There's plenty of other activities and things you can find yourself doing.
And we live in a cool time, man, where you can be, middle-aged to older age to retired and have, there's races all the time where I live. There's pickleball everywhere. There's adult baseball leagues where I live. There's all kind of softball. I think there's so many ways to be active. But I always say to people, when they say they don't like to work out or we haven't found the right workout yet, you probably like something. And the only thing I say to people all the time, and that is, if you're really out of shape, like you just, overweight, horrible conditioning, you're not going to like any activity, right? If you get winded on your way from your car to the yoga class, you will hate the yoga class, right? But you got to put in probably 6 to 8 months in the beginning and really establish some baseline strength, some baseline conditioning. And then you can maybe like a workout or like a training session. But, I don't think anybody's too far gone, but you got to realize the beginning's going to be hard. And then eventually your body will adapt and you'll find some things you like and hopefully be in a better shape to have a long life afterwards or while you're doing it than you were before you started.
Absolutely. No, I could not agree more. And Angelo, I realize we could probably talk about these kind of concepts all day long, whether that be in relation to how athletes prep for kind of that next level that way and some of the other factors and variables that go into that. There's just so much to it. And I think that's probably why you wrote several books about these kind of concepts that we've been discussing is, we always want to dive in deeper, want to learn more that way. There's just so much to it that you can't necessarily cover all the things in an hour or even 2-hour conversation that way. Is there anything that we missed as we were chatting today, or any other kind of thoughts or remarks that you have that we didn't get to discuss?
No, I think the show is a great resource for people. I think strength coaches, PTs, sports medicine professionals working together is obviously the way our profession has to go. And then let's keep collaborating as professions and deal with people when they're healthy, and before they're injured, and get them back to being healthy as soon as possible, and just make people out there being as active as possible, as soon as we can, as efficiently as we can. So thanks a lot, Dan.
Absolutely. And Angela, for people who want to find out more about you online that way, check out your books and so on that way, where can they find you at?
Good. So if you want to look at Facebook, LinkedIn, or Amazon, it's Angelo Gingerelli. I'm sure my name will be in the show notes. Just look it up there. I'm not going to spell it. It's a lot of letters. And then on Instagram, I'm Mr. Fifth Round, MR, the number 5, THRUND. Both books are available now on Amazon and some other retailers. And then if you want to reach out, discuss this more, please shoot me a DM, and I'm always open to talk about all these concepts and topics.
Awesome. Link to all of that in the description below, like you mentioned. That way, if you didn't quite catch it, you can just click there and see everything Angelo is up to. This was awesome, dude. Really appreciate your time and all the good stuff you're doing, man.
Thank you.